The wait was worth it.
What was the reason for the change? Why did we change this? Did it need changing?
It's a mediocre Metroidvania, nothing special at all.
This feels malicious.
Slow, easy, and boring, not interesting at all.
And you can say in the chat right now that this game is reasonably priced. Really? Can anyone say that with good faith right now in chat? You can't. It's not possible. It's not reasonably priced. What are you talking about?
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the second part of the critique of Hollow Knight Silksong. In the previous part, we laid heavily on the gameplay aspect of Silksong. We also covered the game's egregious pricing tactics with references to none other than Joseph Anderson. This time around, we'll cover a variety of topics, including sound design and music, the world, its inhabitants and how you progress through it, and of course, the game's difficulty. I also need to do a retraction.
I haven't printed a retraction in 20 years!
In the last video, I mentioned that Silksong doesn't have special indicators for 2 health points left, as opposed to 1. There is no transition cue for 2 masks. Turns out it actually has. The screen darkens a bit and there is a sound cue when your health drops to 2 bars. Somehow I missed it. My bad. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. Silksong's sound design is majestic. Even with minimal voice lines from bugs who can barely speak, the game delivers distinct, defined voices for nearly every character. It's a masterclass in doing more with less. Many of them can't even sing, and it's still beautiful. It also feels like there is more intent with the voice lines this time around. For example, using in tones and challenges makes it pretty clear that it has a meaning of challenging someone. Is used to call the bell beast to you, but Grindel also starts some of his voice lines with it when trying to get you to let him out of his cell. So it seems like it means something like come here. I think means Trobio. Hornet's voice actor did a tremendous job. She sounds so polite and proud, but not annoying or rude, like a true royal. Also props to the voice actors for making this sound like the most painful thing imaginable. Like, Hornet even makes a comment about how this is the most painful thing ever, and it sure sounds like it. And a fun fact, Trobio has a whopping 77 voice lines he uses in the span of 2 fights, while Hornet, the literal main character, only has 47. Other sound effects are also great. The needle attacks have distinct audio feedback depending on what they connect with. Hitting, killing, being blocked all sound meaningfully different. The place with the keeper and a gramophone is awesome. I really enjoyed how the music transitioned from scratchy vinyl to the actual play's soundtrack. Although it doesn't work that well with other pieces. I love how they implemented the OST that plays during the trailer. And where does this song play during the game? It plays once, only during Hornet's dive at the end. Fans obsessed over the teaser for years. Not only conveying the feelings of the final battle approaching, but acknowledging the long path it took to get here. Not only for Hornet, but for the game itself, from being announced up to the very last battle, which brings us to the game's OST. Do I even have to say anything? Come on, man, it's so good. Farroom is densely populated with bizarre creatures and haunted constructs. It can safely be said that Team Cherry majorly expanded on the enemy variety from their last game. Although there are a lot of unique enemies in Silksong, there are recognizable archetypes that recur across areas, like small ground enemies. Those are your pilgrims, your workers, your hunters. It's usually small enemies that engage you by running straight at you or attacking with their weapon. Some of them can also be divided in subcategories, like there is a pilgrim hiker that has a stick for a weapon, and the same type is met in the underworks and in the choir. which makes sense lore-wise since the bugs supposedly ascend to those positions. You also encounter a lot of small flying enemies. Feels like these get repeated the most. There are essentially two behavioral types that appear across nearly every major area. One that moves fluidly and dives towards you, and one that moves erratically and relies on projectiles, speeding or throwing at a distance. Even though some of their attacks change, their behavior and their tactics stays the same. At the same time, this is the type I enjoyed fighting the least. After they attack you, they usually move even higher away from you, which makes punishing them harder and in a rather frustrating way. With that said, there is plenty of variety with the rest of the bugs. There are also really interesting enemies with unique mechanics. For every bug with a shield and a weapon, you get a maestro with his small bugs, or this thing straight up from Half-Life. Or the plasmid enemies that can heal. A thing that seems to be catching most people off guard is the moveset of basic enemies. In Hollow Knight, most enemies had a single attack. In Silksong, a significant portion of the general enemy population carries 2, 3 or even 4 distinct moves, making encounters more engaging but also genuinely unpredictable until you've learned the patterns. That's why the ants and crows at the beginning seem so tough, while the mid-game feels a lot easier because you get used to it. The stuff I didn't find particularly engaging apart from the abundance of flying enemies is the Act 3 enemies. While I think the idea behind infesting basic enemies with void and thus making them stronger is interesting, I found the execution questionable. The enemies now deal more damage and, more importantly, have a bigger health bar. They also gain 1 or 2 new attacks, which catches you off guard at first. But then you discover that these attacks are shared among all of the void-filled enemies, which makes each encounter feel less unique. The additional health bar also doesn't change things that much, since you've probably already learned these enemies, so encountering them again with one new attack which is shared doesn't feel that refreshing. I understand that asking for more attacks on these already complex enemies feels too much, but then it just diminishes the whole void infested thing. What's the big deal if they are mostly the same? This does change the boss and arena encounters from previous acts if you didn't clear them out. Dealing with bosses that summon minions that can be possessed and now deal 2 masks worth of damage can be tough. The biggest elephant in the room is the introduction of the worst enemy in the game in Act 3, and that is the Void Mass. And it's the worst not because it's hard, but because it's boring. It has 2 attacks that are easily avoidable, but its health bar feels gigantic on top of the fact that they are usually placed somewhere above. Fighting it just feels like such a chore, and you have a quest to haunt 12 of them. Silksong also features a substantial number of arena gauntlets, arguably too many. I like the gauntlets overall, but I found the sheer amount you go through a bit daunting. A constant series of gauntlets before bosses isn't like in Carmelita, Cross King, Grow, Broodmother, Crowfather, The Unraveled, and way more mini gauntlets make it a complete tedium to go through, particularly the ones that are simple enough to feel more like task than challenge. The ones people have the most complaints about are probably the Coral Tower one and the High Halls one. I had fun with both, so I can't agree, but I see the point with them as with any of the gauntlets. Take High Halls for example. Many of the players will find the hardest part of the fight to be the last 2 big guys, who can kill you pretty quickly. Once you die, you need to repeat the whole gauntlet again. If you blast through the waves before the last one, it might be pretty boring getting through them again and again and again just to get to the last fight. I didn't have this experience myself with these 2 gauntlets in particular. I found them quite fun, being a quintessence of gauntlet challenges of the game for Acts 2 and 3 respectively. Overall, I think the gauntlets are an interesting idea which lets you explore combat with basic enemies in more depth. it also fixes the issue of ignoring most of basic enemies in subsequent playthroughs. I just wish there weren't that many to make the overall experience less redundant. But it's time for us to come back to other reviewers.
Now let's talk about the bit where everything fucked up. The thing about Souls-likes is that they're at their best sticking to one-on-one combat. The boss fights with huge weirdos are traditionally the centerpieces of such games. It's about focusing on one enemy, watching for their tells and reacting accordingly, sort of the diametric opposite of Dynasty Warriors. While Souls-likes frequently do have you fight more than one dude at a time, they have to be very careful about how they do it. The Cogwork Dances is a perfect example. It's practically based entirely around there being two of them. Dark Souls 2 has a few of these: Prowling Magus, Royal Rat Vanguard, the Gank Squad with the three lads, and without wishing to draw too fine a line, nobody likes them. Silksong has a bit of a Gank Squad problem.
Here, a reviewer called Second Wind expresses his dissatisfaction with enemy gauntlets. Nothing wrong with that, you can like what you like. The argument he makes though is that Souls-likes work best in 1v1 fights. The difference is, Silksong is not Souls-like. It shares some similar mechanics with Souls games, sure, and you could find many inspirations, but they are fundamentally different. For one, Souls works best in 1v1 because the combat is usually rather slow-paced, with heavy attacks. On top of that, Souls games have the targeting system, which again puts heavy focus on 1v1 fight. Silksong shares none of those qualities. You don't need to control your camera as it is a 2D game. Most of the combat in Silksong is designed around fighting multiple enemies. Hornet is just too mobile to fight one enemy at a time. Her toolkit allows to demolish waves of enemies, on top of the fact that most enemy attacks are designed in such a way that they do not overlap, including the High Host Gauntlet, where the last two big mobs attack most of the time in a specific tempo.
Thankfully, they are quote-unquote programmed to do one attack at a time. There are a couple attacks where they can kind of disobey that rule, so hopefully that doesn't happen.
You can enjoy the gauntlets or you might not, but let's not act like the game's combat is not designed around it. The Coliseum is one of the best parts of the original game. It's also just a funny thing to say when the literal first boss of the game has you fighting more than one enemy at a time.
And spam more projectiles than they did in the first game. Spam projectiles.
They spam these things like crazy.
Spam multiple projectiles at once. Projectile spam. Where he's safe to spam projectiles at you.
Ad spamming or bouncing projectiles constantly.
Spamming poison vials. Projectile spam.
This review is so obnoxious, they call every attack a spam. Flying enemies spam projectiles, bosses spam attacks and spam minions. Trobio spams his name during the fight now, and spams projectiles at you while hiding. What the fuck do you think enemies are supposed to do? Smile at you? But hey, you portrayed people who enjoyed the game as lifeless soyjacks and yourself as a Chad, so you are automatically correct, even if you say stuff like Carmelita spams with summons.
Ad spam is present in some boss fights, and this is true for Carmelita.
Nice argument, Senator. Why don't you back it up with a source?
My source is that I made it the fuck up.
Boss fights is the part of the game where that magnificent combat really gets to shine. Most bosses can be fought in different order, depending on where you choose to explore first. Most of the bosses have multiple phases. With each new phase, their tempo might change, they can get new attacks or summon additional forces. There are 48 boss fights, 44 of which are unique. At first, I wanted to analyze each and every boss, but then I found myself repeating the same stuff from time to time. As for some bosses, there isn't a lot to say. He has this attack, which you can dodge by going here, so on and so forth. So instead, I'll provide a general analysis with a particular focus on some of the more interesting ones. Moss Mother is the first boss in the game. As the starting boss fight, she's quite simple. She has only two attacks: a swoop and slam into the ceiling followed by fallen rocks and minions. You fight her 2 more times. The second time is the classic same but 2 variation, and the third time is Void Infused Moss Mother. I usually hate the let's just multiply the same boss trope. Here it helps measure your progress. The first fight is your introduction to combat when you're still finding your footing. The second is a measuring stick. You've grown and Blasting Through Her demonstrates it, even if there are 2 of her now. The third is a representation that even a basic enemy becomes dangerous when filled with void. That's the intent. However, the intent behind the encounters does not make them actually good. Most Mother's moveset is the same in each fight. Only the void-filled one gets one additional move. Dealing more damage and having a bigger health bar does not create an interesting challenge. Although it is interesting that the first boss we fight is a mother, and then the last boss of Act 2 is a grandmother, Sins of the Fathers, or whatever. Many of the early bosses occupy a similar tier of deliberate simplicity. Bell Beast, Scout Tyrant, Fourth Chorus, Sister Splinter, Morrowind. The last 2 got nerfed from the release patch, so I couldn't experience them at full strength. These bosses are on a simpler side to ease your way into the game, to allow you get familiar with Hornet's toolkit. Said toolkit progressively expands and the bosses become harder. Although I think Silksong's difficulty curve could have been handled better. Among the first couple of bosses, the one with the most complexity is probably a daughter of Grandmother Silk. Blaze is a recurring boss fight, but each encounter is different. The first fight is reminiscent of the Knight's encounter with Hornet in the first game. She has a lot of attacks that can feel overwhelming at first, but it becomes easy to dodge them and land hits of your own once you get used to her pace. I also want to highlight this one. You fight Savage Beast fight twice. One of them is kept in the Chapel of the Beast and tries to escape by continuously charging at the gate. A second Savage Beast fight is found in the far fields, raging through the wildlands and hindering pilgrims. This one fucking sucks. It has 2 attacks and in phase 2 it also screams and summons minions. The attack that causes the most trouble is his charge. It's a fucking missile. Savage Beast fight charges horizontally across the arena 3 times in a row. The first charge tracks Hornet. On the second charge it adjusts its height either up or down depending on if it has space above or below, and the charge itself does not trace Hornet. The third charge once again tracks her. Dodging all 3 charges consistently is hard. And the second encounter is even worse. You encounter the Savage Beast fight again in the same arena where you fought the Fourth Chorus. And this fight is straight up bullshit. There are no walls here, so not only you won't be able to lure it into the wall, thus ending the attack prematurely, but it will also straight up fly off screen and attack from there. You may end up too close to the edge, and since this fucker tracks you, dodging its attack becomes merely impossible. Add the fact that it destroys platforms with its other attack, with the possibility to destroy all of the platforms, but hey, you can lure it in a gap between platforms and nothing happens, it just resurfaces. Add the fact that minions it now summons are stupid termites which deal 2 masks of damage at range while flying up high. I don't like this fight. Generally, I don't think having an attack that builds up off-screen is a good idea. After the opening stretch, the game shifts gears considerably. What follows can fairly be described as
Banger! After banger! After banger! After banger! After banger!
the only living Weaver Hornet encounters on her journey, and the first real skill check of the game. A major leap in difficulty from previous bosses. She has a variety of attacks that she quickly juggles through, aggressively going after the player and throwing a bunch of projectiles. She's very fast, and at this point in the game, Hornet is not that agile yet, resulting in a rather small window for a counterattack. Out of the first bunch of bosses, this one's definitely my favorite. A hyper-aggressive fight that gives an opportunity to fully display Silksong's combat. The last judge is the final obstacle before the Citadel. As the final boss of Act 1, she provides an appropriate challenge. She has a bunch of different attacks that require precision in dodging and using an opening to land a few hits. In her second phase, her Thurible ignites and her attacks change while also adding fire damage. Some of her attacks block projectiles, so you get even fewer opportunities to punish her. The fight is just so well made, and she really tests your knowledge of tools, positioning, timing, and everything you've learned so far. She also fucking explodes upon defeat, and my stupid ass managed to die to that, so I had to redo the whole fight again, which I actually think is the only problem of the fight because it doesn't have enough indicators that her explosion deals any kind of damage. It's too similar to other bosses who die and explode. The run back is also brutal. Because this bench is pretty far away and Blasted Steps is not an easy area, the run back through Blasted Steps fits really well thematically here and really sets the tone for the fight. She's a well-designed fight with great animations and little to no bullshit, except the final blow. She's an amazing fight that makes you earn the right to trample the Citadel's holy grounds, for you are a sinner and deserve to face God's judgment. The alternative final challenge of Act 1, and I also freaking love it. The build up to her fight is even better than the last judges. Here in Phantom playing on the organ as you reach her, and once the fight starts, the soundtrack just blasts you with Bloody Tears-esque organ sounds.
Uh-oh. But this one is sparingly used, kind of more in a mellow. Ah, we didn't get full evil. Now we do!
In terms of pure storytelling, this is probably my favorite fight of the game. Clockwork Dancers are twin automaton dancers in which the Green Prince's partner's soul is trapped and forced to do the same dance they did with their partner for eternity. The fight has a unique gimmick. The dancers highlight the direction in which they will move with a short delay, moving in rhythm to the soundtrack. You might have guessed it, the gimmick is that it's a dance. And it's absolutely stunning. This battle is split into 4 phases, each marked by the dancers moving back to their station to be wound up. Clockwork Dancers do not share HP. A phase ends when either reaches 0 health for the phase. In phase 2, the soundtrack speeds up and their attacks become faster. In phase 3, they move offset from one another. And in the last phase, only one dancer is left who is forced to continue the dance without his partner. Mechanically speaking, this fight is pretty easy. The difficult part here is to see what's going on through your tears.
Dude, how sad is that?
First Sinner is another Weaver Hornet fight, but her fight happens in a memory. Due to it being a memory fight, you technically can't die. But unlike other dream fights, this one does not restore your resources if you lose, for some reason. Moving to the fight itself, First Sinner is even more aggressive and fast than Widow. She quickly cycles through a variety of attacks with a large cover area, swipes, teleportation, launches, even rune summoning. She has a deep toolkit and during phase 2 she becomes even faster. Her ability to rapidly retreat and reposition makes chaining needle attacks together significantly harder, so using range attacks can help a lot as keeping up with her is hard. The fight is great, I don't have any issues with it, but I really don't get why you respawn without your resources.
Mr. Anderson. Well, if it isn't Saucy Jack.
The second encounter with Waze is the penultimate fight of Act 2, so a difficult fight is to be expected. She has 3 phases. The first phase is very similar to her first fight, but now she's much faster and some of the attacks are extended. As her attacks are mostly horizontal, you would think staying off the ground for as much as possible would be the best way to deal with her, but she cycles through her jumping attacks so fast that she can catch you real fast. Still, the lack of vertical attacks can at least be abused for healing. In the second phase she adds an additional follow attack to her spinning attack, and in a third phase she adds a judgment cut. This attack has a bit of wacky hitboxes. During this attack, a white circle appears. Then Lace unleashes a whirlwind of slashes within the highlighted region, and then slams down. If Hornet is caught within the circle, she receives damage, which makes sense, but after she ends the slashes and before slamming down, the circle disappears. However, Hornet still gets damaged if she enters its area. She's then teleported right under Lace as it's a command grab. I think it's a bit misleading with attack circle disappearing. There is no indication of the area of attack still being the same. It would be better if the circle didn't disappear, or maybe just have some indication of Lace's down attack being wider. Grandmother Silk is the main antagonist of the game and the final boss of Act 2. The most obvious comparison is Radiance. Both fights share some similarities. Grandmother Silk does not deal contact damage, mostly attacking with the blades that she summons. The hardest attack she has is probably the Silk Web, where she grabs you and deals 3 masks worth of damage if her silk touches you. The hitboxes on this attack are so precise that the command grab may be triggered if the silk touches your pinky toe. She has a total of 6 phases, which may sound a lot, but as this is the final boss of Act 2, you should have a large toolkit at your disposal and she can go down relatively quick. On top of that, she's not that mobile, and the absence of contact damage really unties your hands in terms of build variety. Although not all of the fights are so exciting. Some of the fights are more gimmicky, like the Father of Flame, where you don't get silk from attacks and need to target only specific parts, or the Unraveled, which is more like a horror encounter, or bosses like Vault Worm, a Vault Worm thing. It spawns slow AoE zap attacks while exposing itself for damage. The attack patterns are easily mesmerized, but you don't even need to do that, as they are pretty slow. Yeah, this one's a bit undercooked. Some of the fights are rather misplaced, like the disgraced chief Lugoli. Lugoli has a huge problem, an astronomical thing. He definitely has a bottomless potential, but it's like an Act 1 fight that you fight in Act 2. His attacks are pretty basic and easy to dodge. The only problem he can pose is that he can infest you with grubs, so wear protection and you'll be fine. Watch out for the S. I also can't help but feel that most of NPC boss fights are rather lacking. Garmon and Zaza, Plasmified Dango in Act 3 all are a bit too easy, although with Garmon and Zaza it's a part of their whole shtick. Chakra's moves look cool, but she's easy to deal with too. Same thing kinda goes for the second Sentinel, an NPC with a quest line where you fight him at the end. You rebuild him, he then goes protecting the citadel from intruders, until he defines Hornet as an intruder and challenges her. He has a multitude of attacks and variations, but he's easy to read and he's pretty flimsy. Taking him down doesn't take long. Which brings us to the final stretch of the game. Act 3. I already brought this up a couple of times, but I am amazed at Team Cherry's decision to essentially hide so much content in optional Act 3. Like, Act 3 has 15 bosses, and if you skipped some of the bosses in previous acts, in Act 3 they get black threaded, getting more HP and dealing more damage. In any case, in Act 3 you need to acquire 3 old hearts, out of 4 available. Each one you get from a boss fight, and I think these fights are underwhelming. 3 out of 4 actual old hard bosses are way too easy. especially for Act 3. The biggest disappointment for me is obviously the Clover Dancers. This felt like such a missed opportunity. The fight is just too similar to Clockwork Dancers. Not enough was done to distinguish them. The arena is smaller, the new spinning whirlwind attack is a pretty hectic dodge, and now you can only damage one of them. But overall it's too similar to Cogwork and not hard enough. You've already learned Cogwork dances by now, but you also probably have more tools, more HP and deal more damage by now. The fact that you can attack only one of them also doesn't seem like a challenge. For once, Clockwork Dancers already didn't have a shared HP, so the best strategy there was to target only one dancer. Here you just do the same. I think an additional phase with some kind of change would be better. Fast King Khan is also an easy and kinda underwhelming fight, but to get to him you need to go through the whole Coral Tower Gauntlet, which at least makes it understandable why he himself is so easy. Similar theme with Nihilith. I was surprised to find out many people had trouble with this boss. I guess due to the missing floor, but like, just use the Ascendance Grid. But even without it, there are many tools in the game that help you deal with her. Honestly, I found the fight too easy if anything. But Nihilith is guarded by Seth. Seth is a different thing, one of my favorite fights in the game. He has a massive variety of attacks, he moves a lot, blocks attacks and has like the smallest windows for a counter attack. I also cannot not mention the story behind his creation. Seth Goldman, a 16-year-old with a very rare type of bone cancer, contacted the Marty Lyons Foundation, which fulfills the wishes of kids who are terminally ill. And it just so happened that Seth was a Hollow Knight fan, so he wanted to meet Tim Cherry. At first, Tim Cherry agreed to one video chat, but it quickly turned into many, and Tim Cherry offered him to create an NPC and boss for Silksong. Seth died later in 2020, but he did see the boss fight complete and said in a Reddit comment that he saw videos of him and that he's a fucking monster. I couldn't describe the fight better. The last one of the old heart is Scarsinger Carmelita. This one fucking slaps. In terms of pure design, she's my favorite. I already mentioned my overall dissatisfaction with teleportations due to contact damage being a thing, and like First Sinner teleports, Lost Lace teleports, even Seth teleports, but Carmelita takes her sweet time dancing across the stage to reach me and still never fails to utterly discombobulate. There is no need to cut in order to set up a different attack, because her moves flow perfectly into each other. The build-up, the start of the fight itself, animation, telegraphs, pacing, VFX, balancing, nothing is missing, everything is perfect. Knowing her windows is key here, and many of her attacks are specifically designed to leave you without safe zones. Against Lace, for example, you are relatively safe in the air, but against Carmelita you are never safe. Her dive attack ensures of it. She throws a bunch of curvesicles to ensure you are not safe at a distance, and her dive ensures anywhere but air is unsafe. And I think she takes some steroids between phases 2 and 3, because in phase 3 she basically has no downtime. She stops her performative shit and just throws hands. She's in Godspeed mode. Although I won't lie, on my first playthrough I abused the fact that it's a dream fight and just spammed her with red tools. But have you seen no damage fights against her? Fucking hell. Since we discussed Carmelita, I think it's time to mention my major gripe with this game. Let's call it cinematic intros. This honestly feels like a really bad design choice, and it's something that was present in the original Hollow Knight, but not to such extent. Some of the fights have a really long build-up, and getting them once is fine for a quote-unquote cinematic experience. But since you probably have multiple attempts at fighting these bosses, it gets frustrating real fast. The biggest example of this are the dream fights. To fight Carmelita, Hornet needs to place the needle in for like 10 seconds, then she gets into a dream, then she needs to go around the arena to finally reach the actual fight. Why not restart in a dream already after the loss, especially when you already have a way to leave the dream by just going in the opposite direction. Some of the other fights in Act 3 are pretty cool, some are not so much. You also fight Trobio one more time, only now he's tormented Trobio. He's gained additional attacks and he's a lot more flashy. I'm a big fan of Grim fight in the first game, and I saw some comparisons of Trobio to Grim, but I don't see it. Maybe only because they are both performative. The fight itself is RNG heavy. A lot of his attacks are built around area denial. His whirlwinds cut you off, his bows cut you off, etc, etc. And a lot of his attacks overlap, so you'll often find yourself in a situation where taking damage is unavoidable, only with something like cross stitch. You can hit the bombs and somewhat provoke him into certain attacks, but it doesn't completely solve the overlapping issue. The fight has several points where enough attacks happen at once that it's literally impossible to fully dodge. This is also one of the fights where there is a lot of visual clutter, like a lot. Really takes time to get used to what is even going on the screen. At last, we get to the final boss, Lost Lace. Overall, it's safe to say she's the hardest boss of the game. I both love this fight and I think there is some bullshit to it. She has probably the biggest number of attacks and the smallest punish windows. She has counters, missiles, dashes, teleports, globes. She also has mix-ups, cancels, anything, you name it. This is fine, the final boss should challenge all of your skills, which is why she has so many different attacks. For example, Lost Lace has a triple dash attack. She can cancel her dash early if you get away. She can mix up her third dash into a void tentacle attack or a somersault, which in turn she can follow up with a dive or a different tentacle attack. With her parry, she has different variations of a follow-up attacks. And I find this good. Learning her patterns and every mix-up and how to react accordingly to bait her into specific attacks felt more like a fighting game experience. And I found a lot of comments claiming this fight is unfair, and I don't exactly agree. I can say with confidence that I suck at the game and it took me a gazillion of tries to beat her, but I methodically found that all of her attacks leave a room for punishment. Hell, you can even find detailed guides on Wiki on how to capitalize on each of her moves. Now to the bad part, and it's phases 3 and 4. There is just a lot less visual clearness, the arena becomes darker. Lace herself is black and her attacks are dark as well. On top of that, her attacks begin to overlap, like when she summons these void tentacles and then does another attack while these tentacles are active. And the issue here is not that you can't dodge these attacks, it's that you just can't tell what the hell is going on. I really don't like this approach. I'm not sure if it was done to spike up the difficulty or to just add a unique visual feel to the fight, but in any case this is not something I find good. In the case of Lost Lace, it's particularly important to pay attention to her moves and be able to read her telegraphs and react accordingly. But now I have to fight with visual clutter instead of the boss itself. And of course, she teleports. And it feels like Lace teleports on top of you more often than other bosses. Maybe it's just a me issue and I need to be more careful, but I still find an unavoidable teleportation attack with practically no build-up in an area with so much clutter to be at least questionable. Like, patterns themselves are great and fair, but holy fucking shit, that motherfucker always spawns right on top of me. Some of her hitboxes are a bit wanky too. Her triple charging attack turns her entire body into a hitbox, so when you jump over it and down smash instead of getting a hit in, the game registers it as a parry of the attack. There are also some weird command grabs, like I get that she hit me here, but why am I teleported away? Overall, I can't say I didn't enjoy the fight, and she certainly fits to be the final boss, but visual overload and stupid teleports brings this fight down for me a bit. By covering most of the bosses, we can see that Silksong presents a clear intent in its design. The game tries to make you progressively go through harder fights, expanding with each battle. A lot of the bosses share similarities, as these are more humanoid, well, bug-annoyed, fast-paced fights, but it is clear that fights with a frenetic pace is where Silksong's combat gets to shine, as they challenge Hornet's toolkit. And Silksong does not just require you to have fast reaction speed, the game does not meaninglessly challenge you. The most important parts are positioning, correct reading of the enemy's movements, and utilizing your toolkit to the fullest extent. Although the difficulty curve is not ideal, and that is something we will cover in the next part. But before we do that, let's check what other reviewers had to say about the game's bosses.
On top of that, another incredibly frustrating thing is the windows to punish bosses are so small. You have these bosses like the Last Judge or the second Lace fight that are particularly egregious in this aspect. As the Last Judge has this really fast startup kind of get off me move where she spins her flail. You don't have time to get more than one hit in before that move comes out. And with Lace, she has an incredibly fast parry that punishes you if you swing more than one time in almost all cases. So there's just not much room for you to get any significant punishes in.
Yeah, you can. Or you can use the slowest crest in the game and complain because it's the slowest one. Lace's parry is one of her most punishable moves, as it leaves her wide open. It's also the easiest to dodge because you just need to jump twice.
And we won't be touching on anything story or lore related in this video, since these games kind of go out of their way to obscure it from you unless you want to borderline 100% them. But why does this random theater kid even want to kill you in the first place? He shows up out of nowhere, starts screaming his own name, and tries to kill you. For what reason?
He tells you why once you enter his arena. The game indeed went out of its way to obscure this detail from you by making Trobio tell you why he wants to fight you.
Bosses take so many hits to kill that boss fights really are just a test of your patience, not a test of your skill. For example, Lost Judge, who's the final boss of Act 1, takes 144 hits to kill you with an unupgraded nail, and the second Lace fight, which is the penultimate boss fight of the game, takes 160 hits from an unupgraded nail to kill. And keep in mind, even when you get the first nail upgrade, it only takes your damage from 5 HP per hit to 9 HP per hit. So even with the upgrades, it still takes a while to kill these bosses.
You claim that the boss's HP is too good, and to prove that point you mention how many hits you need to do to a penultimate boss fight with a starting nail, ignoring upgrades, ignoring skills and tools the game provides. Not only do you try to purposefully mislead viewers, you're also straight up wrong. Damage system of Silksong is significantly more complex than it might seem. Taking enemy HP and dividing it by basic damage number is not how you do the calculations. There are specific enemy modifiers that change depending on your needle level and your equipment. For example, the Last Judge indeed has 720 HP. For the sake of an argument, let's take Hornet's basic needle damage without any modifiers. It deals 5 damage. The Last Judge modifier for basic needle is 1.2, which means you will kill him in 120 hits, not 144. If you have upgraded your needle at least once, which you probably will since the only requirement for that is to defeat a widow and talk to the pinmaster, the damage is boosted to 9 and the modifier changes to 1, resulting in 80 hits. This is of course me ignoring all the tools and crests and silk skills that give you extra damage. What's funny is that if you fight Lace with an unupgraded nail, she goes down in 91 hit, because while she has a bit more HP than the Last Judge, her modifier is also higher. But the argument about boss's HP feels like an entirely subjective topic, since a lot of it depends on your capabilities and your build and upgrades and your enjoyment of the fight. So I can only share my experience. I do agree that it feels like some bosses indeed have too big of a health bar, while others have too little HP. The Last Judge and the Lace fights falling under none of those. Someone like Carmelita comes to mind for an enemy which takes a bit too many hits to go down, while Nylith is on the opposite, she's too squishy. certainly a hot topic for this game. After Silksong's release, a major discussion about its difficulty took place, from many Reddit posts to reviews and essays about it. A discussion about a game's difficulty is not something new. It also seems to be a recurring theme. When a quote-unquote difficult game gets a lot of attention, a discussion about how hard and unfair it is spawns out. And to no surprise, a game gets a lot of sales, it lures in casuals. Casuals complain that it is too hard and it needs an easy mode. Then hardcore fans tell others to get good, rinse and repeat. Although, honestly, I don't really get why this is an important thing. If the game is too difficult for you, then just don't play it. Maybe it's just everyone's desire to be part of a community, part of this overall experience. They don't want to be left out so much that they try to complete the game, but since they can't, they feel frustrated. But let's try and make a compelling argument whether Silksong is a difficult game or not. Difficulty is inherently subjective, but you can break it down into two components: precision and punishment. How exact do your inputs need to be, and how badly do you pay for getting it wrong? I Wanna Be the Guy requires near-frame perfect execution at all times. A single mistake means death. On the other hand, something like The Last of Us has enemies that deal relatively small damage and you can kill them by just shooting at them or pressing a button to hit without the need to pinpoint the enemy, so it has a lot of room for error. Silksong sits clearly on the demanding end of that spectrum. Enemies frequently kill you in 3 or 4 hits. Platforming section asks for precision, even compared to its predecessor. It's harder than the original Hollow Knight. But that observation on its own doesn't tell you much. To me, a game's difficulty is really measured by two things: fairness and intent. Let's start with fairness. Unfair difficulty comes from bugs or poor game design decisions. For example, I don't think it's fair for an enemy to have a bunch of hard-hitting attacks with the same or non-existent build-up. In that sense, is Silksong fair? Mostly yes. Enemies usually have distinct animations and enough room for you to react accordingly. And with vast equipment, you have different ways to react. Traversal is similarly legible. I saw complaints about the new down attack, which makes it harder to pogo jump, but I believe the game's design at least tries to compensate for its difficulty, gradually introducing you to the mechanic and making it harder as you progress. Later you can get a new tool with a better down attack too. There are some exceptions though. I really hate teleporting enemies. You get hit on collisions with enemies, which means an enemy colliding with you is an attack. So every teleportation can be considered an attack. The problem is that there is no build-up. It happens instantly. Which is why, if you run, you can get hit by an enemy you can't see and can't react to. I understand the design rationale. Hornet is so mobile that some enemies need mobility to stay threatening, and there is a counter to it with a harpoon, but harpoon costs silk, even if a small amount. And even this approach does not work reliably. Then you can say just don't run, stay in one place, but some enemies, like the Lost Race, have so quick attacks that you need to be mobile. Another issue, and this is related mostly to bosses, is enemies attacking you off-screen. With most projectiles you have a small window to react, but some are fast enough or large enough that by the time they are visible, the decision is already made for you. This can cause frustration when you feel like there is nothing you could have done to avoid getting hit. And I have to clarify that I'm not trying to sit here and pretend the game's not hard, but the challenge Silksong presents is fair and well crafted. Team Cherry had an ambitious task set before them. The original Hollow Knight was a game, among other things, known for its difficulty. It had the same discussions Silksong has now. How do you follow up on that? If you make the game as challenging as the original one, long-time players will blast through it, having legacy memories. But then, if you focus on your long-time fans' experience and tune to their liking, or try to one-up yourself, you might focus too much on the game's difficulty. A similar thing happened to Dark Souls. The game's difficulty was heavily used in marketing, calling the first game Prepare to Die Edition. But then Dark Souls 2 and Elden Ring kinda lost its way. making the game difficult for the sake of difficulty. And there is an appeal to games like that for sure, but I believe Team Cherry tried something different here. Silksong is something I would call challenging, but not necessarily hard. The game's difficulty comes from the sheer variety of options given to you. I played the original Hollow Knight a lot, and while I'm nowhere near the great players of that game, at least I feel like I got the gist of Hollow Knight's combat. With Silksong, it always feels like I could be doing so much more, that I still have ways to go and never really got the hang of Silksong's combat. In previous parts, we've already covered just how many options Silksong gives you in combat and exploration. There is a specific intent behind Team Cherry's design philosophy, and I think, for the most part, it is executed wonderfully. There are missteps that I already mentioned in some shape or form. The difficulty curve could have been handled better. Silksong has a surprisingly high skill floor, and it expects a lot from the player immediately. I don't think the beginning of the game is very hard at all, once you've mastered Hornet's movements and such, but mastering them definitely takes a lot of time. It's the Sekiro effect. Sekiro was the kind of game that had an absurd skill floor as early on. If you didn't know how to play the game, well, you were getting your ass handed to you. But at the same time, the moment the gameplay starts to click, the difficulty curve is noticeably slower than the average game, only really getting tough during boss encounters. Silksong frankly feels no different. Act 1 is pretty brutal, but Act 2 feels a good deal easier since the curve starts to peter out after the last judge. Once I spent more time with Silksong, I realized how many basic suggestions to make the game easier would remove any kind of challenge. Sure, some things can be balanced a bit better, but a lot of suggestions would completely remove any challenge for players who are competent with the mechanics, combat and controls. Sekiro kinda had the same issue. You can't make it much easier without removing the challenge completely for anyone that adapts for the controls, game mechanics and combat system. With that said, I also feel like there has been some development oversight in early game difficulty. To give an example, I am baffled that beating Splinter's sister and the subsequent parkour section rewards you with an ability that unlocks much less difficult content like Skull Tyrant. Maybe the intention is to give the player a breather, but I suspect early game progression has not received enough attention. It's a bit of a whack, which sort of brings us to the issue of too many enemies dealing 2 masks of damage. It kinda breaks the difficulty curve when you have a bunch of enemies deal 2 damage in the first 2 areas. And this is something Team Cherry themselves pointed out, but the prevalence of enemies dealing double damage is a balancing thing. Hornet heals faster than the Knight. She also can heal in midair, which makes healing a lot easier, so enemies hit harder to compensate and keep encounters tense. This results in fights being more engaging. You are always on the edge, which doesn't translate so well in parkour sections, and Team Cherry seems to agree, seeing how they nerfed blasted steps and Sands of Korra damage. This approach makes sense, but it ruins the sense of progression. Let's take the fight with the last judge as an example. The last judge deals 2 masks worth of damage. Now, let's say you fight her without upgrades. At the beginning of the game, Hornet has 5 masks, which means she dies in 3 hits. What if you come to the fight with all of the upgrades? Well, in Act 1 you can upgrade your health bar by 1 mask, which means she still dies in 3 hits. That argument obviously ignores the healing benefit, as Hornet heals 3 masks, which will give you an option to tank more hits. But I am playing the devil's advocate at this point. The reality is there is still a high chance you will get blitzed by the last judge whether you took your time upgrading your health or not. And the last judge is not the only enemy that deals double damage in Act 1. Not even close. All in all, I don't have that much of a problem with an abundance of enemies that deal double damage, as the game balances it out with Hornet's tools and mobility. Double damage is a good way to keep players on their toes and not face tanking as much. My concern is how early they appear, when players are still figuring out basic movement, and the fact that it ruins progression in both ways. for you progressing and getting stronger, and for enemies getting stronger. That being said, the only thing I would change to facilitate this opinion is bringing the big skull mobs down to 1 damage, and maybe contact damage on some of the enemies, like the Bell Beast and the Lost Ways. It kinda makes sense, huge enemies deal 2 damage on contact. Why is Lost Ways doing that while also teleporting right on top of you?
Bosses and enemies have become far more punishing and frustrating than actually difficult. The enemies and bosses in this game feel overly punishing rather than truly difficult.
What the fuck do you even mean when you say they are not difficult but punishing? Room for error and the subsequent punishment you receive is one of the basic principles of difficulty. This is something a lot of people say: the game's not difficult, it's just punishing, or artificially difficult, or just not interesting.
It's artificially difficult in a way that's unfun and designed to frustrate the player rather than challenge them.
Bosses and enemies have become far more punishing and frustrating than actually difficult. The enemies and bosses in this game feel overly punishing rather than truly difficult.
It's not difficult, but it's just not interesting. The game is not hard mechanically, it's annoying and artificially difficult. It was designed exclusively to keep you glued to the screen and not to provide any enjoyment. Waited 6 years for enemy spam inside of tight boss rooms to add artificial difficulty. The game isn't difficult, it just finds to wear you down and just make you not want to play anymore. This is just punishing for the sake of punishment, and not even in a good way. It's not fun, it's not difficult, it's just stifling and uninspiring.
You could design it to be harder in a way that is fun.
These games aren't really that difficult. The underlying problem is that Hollow Knight and Silksong are bloated and suffocating under the weight of their own tedium. Tedium that is disguised as difficulty.
Cheaply inflated difficulty.
Guys, the game is hard, it's okay to admit that, you'll be fine. Another rather conflicted topic is the runbacks. There are a lot of polar opinions claiming all runbacks are good or all of them are bad. Some folks claim that you objectively can't enjoy runbacks, they are just not fun.
The boss runbacks quickly sap any fun I would be having, because they purely exist to waste your time and are totally obnoxious.
Which is a daft thing to say. Runbacks are part of the experience, they can be both good or bad. The purpose of any runback is to elevate the stakes of dying, and that it demands a fine-tuning of platforming ability and environmental knowledge, which is part of the platforming component of the game. It also helps to craft your emotional perception of the location. For example, fear, dread, stress. People claiming that it's objectively bad and hey, FromSoft removed it from Elden Ring means it was bad. Yeah buddy, not like Elden Ring is entirely different from Dark Souls 1 and 3 since it's a open world game and FromSoft did not invent runbacks. Even GTA had them. Fucking Super Mario Bros. Had runbacks. The argument also doesn't work since Demon's Souls had runbacks. All of Dark Souls had runbacks, with Dark Souls 2 probably having the hardest. So do you think it took them at least 6 games to figure that one out? With one game where they doubled down on the runbacks? Or maybe they just had different goals in mind. And like, I get it, you want to have another try at a boss, but you are forced to go through the area. To me, it's not an issue as I enjoy the game in its entirety. I'm not just playing a boss rush. As long as the runback has meaning behind it, it doesn't bother me. And I don't wanna sound obtuse. I get why some folks don't like runbacks. I don't like some of them either. They can be tedious and time wasting. Let's look at an example of actually my favorite runback in the game. The infamous The Last Judge. This one is claimed to be the hardest by most of the players. Yeah, wait till you get to Biowater. I had a very mixed experience with this run-up. Once I got up, The Last Judge smoked me, so I had to start from the beginning. Multiple attempts in, I started to become frustrated by the boss, so I wanted to get to him faster and try to beat him one more time. I started to become careless, making mistakes on my climb up to blasted steps. I had especially hard time with this fucking flying piece of shit, but then I started to readjust, trying to find the optimal route which would take the least amount of time and the least amount of danger. I found these attempts at finding the optimal route via shortcuts and skips really engaging. The whole climb up through the blasted steps also does wonders for the atmosphere and tension of the fight itself. But this experience can be the opposite, if you feel the runbacks is not that engaging and you feel like you're just wasting time. But then, how far do we go with removing stuff that you just got good at dealing with or don't want to be good or don't wish to engage with? This review claims Team Cherry should remove first phases from bosses because they are too easy.
The second phase is basically always the real fight. The first phase is so easy and so simple that it's basically a cutscene that you have to sit through before you get to the fun part. First phase, essentially pointless. The vast majority are so significantly easier than their second, more interesting phase that they would be better off removed.
You must be some kind of a dumbass.
Like we already discussed before, the time-wasting stuff like getting into the dream sequence is something I would call an issue, not a runback that actually presents itself as a challenge. And all of this is something Naked JK covered in his video. But I think this is like the basic conclusion you come to. Another thing related to the game's difficulty is its economy.
The resource economy in this game is broken. Rosaries, which you need for all manner of upgrades, are way too scarce, way too easy to lose, and even some of the tool refills, like the Flea Brew or the Phasmium files, cost rosaries to refill each time you run out of them.
Even the benches and fast travel points cost them. It's absurd how broken this economy is.
Way to miss the point. You can explain why the rosaries are so scarce, but too bad. I already portrayed you as a Soyjack virgin. The overall economy is an improvement from the original Hollow Knight, but I don't disagree that some fine-tuning might be needed. Silksong has two in-game currencies that both work independently: rosaries, for which you can buy stuff, and shell shards, which are used for crafting. You get both from killing enemies. Some drop one or the other, some drop both, and from finding hidden treasures. You don't lose shell shards on death, but you do lose your rosaries, which you can restore by finding your cocoon at the place of death. If you die again before restoring lost rosaries, they are gone. Forever. The rosary economy is cruel, you mostly get small amounts. On the other hand, everything in the game costs those same rosaries. Upgrades, new tools, benches, opening fast travel, maps, map items. You need rosaries for everything. Story-wise, it makes perfect sense. But what about the gameplay aspect? The reality is you probably won't have enough rosaries to buy all the things you want, not on your first playthrough. Sure, you might resort to grinding and there are delivery quests which reward you with rosaries, but this is not something a lot of people would find entertaining. And Team Cherry did tune down the cost of things like benches in the early and mid game, and buffed rosary rewards from things like relics and deliveries, so that proves there was an issue. The economy is mostly balanced around the fact that you don't get the most OP stuff easily, and it doesn't stumble upon the issues of the original Hollow Knight, where you just have so much money at some point that dying loses any meaning. Some players might fall into the problem of never having enough rosaries, even for the basic stuff, which can be viewed as a negative, and getting all the stuff feels too hard to the point that you need to do some grinding. On my initial playthrough, I never had to resort to grinding. The closest stuff to grind I did was some delivery quests, which I did just to see how hard they are, and some mob kills, which was for some of the wishes. I always had enough rosaries for the basic quality of life stuff and also the tools I was interested in. The only gripe I have is the rewards from bosses. They just don't give you anything. Some bosses do give you some upgrades, but others just die without dropping anything. Sure, you progress forward by beating the boss, but it would be nice to be actually rewarded. Same thing with arena gauntlets. Like, shouldn't the high host gauntlet just blast you with rosaries? Rewards for finding fleas is also non-existent, and that's a shame. Shell shards is a different beast though, and it's a lot harder to balance it out. Shell shards are used to replenish the stocks of red tools. The number of shell shards needed varies by tool. Your shard's capacity is also limited, being 400 at the beginning and can be upgraded up to 800. Red tools are very powerful weapons, so they are balanced by two things. You have a limited number of uses before you rest, and the overall number of tools is also limited by your shards amount. The issue it presents is players will run out of shell shards, especially more casual players, especially during boss fights. As I often took many tries to beat some of the bosses, I often ran out of shards I had. This creates a weird dynamic. The first suggestion you might think of is to not use the tools relentlessly and learn the boss first, but then you're kinda promoting to just not use the tools. And if you learn how to beat the boss without the tools, then what's the point of using them? But being selective with when to use tools in a boss fight is still a great tip. Another thing that at least happened to me is I would often run out of shell shards, which meant I had a very limited number of tools left. But I didn't have any desire to go and grind shards, so I would swap for different ones. Because if you swap tools without any shards, you still can use replenished amount of tools, which obviously promoted me to try out different tools, different combinations and strategies instead of resorting to poison cockfights all the time. But the issue here is obvious. The overall cost of tools and the game's toughness feel contradictory. It's not necessarily a bad thing to need a lot of time on a boss, but it does greatly discourage tool usage during the learning process. For the same reason, I mostly ignored the Architect's Crest during my first playthrough, as it just felt like too much of a hassle to deal with constantly depleting shards. Maybe it would be better to nerf the overall tool damage but also decrease how much they cost, or outright remove the cost. I also feel like the shards economy would be better if you didn't have to buy bundles one at a time. Same with beating your rosaries. Stocking up on shards and rosaries is just unnecessary long. Another part players might find difficult is the story progression. Some bits, story or otherwise, are a bit too hidden. I know that this is what Team Cherry set out to achieve, as they want to get people to talk about their game. And sharing guides is one of the ways to do that, but relying on a Wikipedia to progress through the game is not the best way, but it is what most players will do due to the lack of indicators. Unfortunately, we are not in the old times where you would find secrets in games by talking to your friends or by looking up some secret stuff in secret journals. It's just not happening. Like the Silken Soul Wish needs you to complete a set of specific quests and a bunch of random quests to get enough points to then get this wish from the caretaker. All of this to get access to the whole last act of the game. And then Act 3 itself. Look, here's the location of Nihilith, one of the old hard bosses you need to beat. If some of you, dear viewers, haven't located her yet, could you guess where she's accessed from? Well, the icon looks sorta foresty, and judging by the themes of other old hard bosses being the rulers of once thriving kingdoms below the citadel, you would think she's probably somewhere in the Sherwood. Maybe she's accessed through blasted steps, seeing how she's in between those two areas. No, she's fucking not. You get to her through the citadel, through a hidden breakable wall in the elevator shaft. Sure, people will talk about it online because they have no fucking idea where to go because the marker is misleading, and you hide a main boss location between a stupid breakable wall. I do appreciate that most of the stuff like the economy system and the lack of meaningful indicators is done at least with a specific intent in mind. Punishment is not done for the sake of punishment, but rather to tell a specific story, even though I still think some of it wouldn't miss a bit of fine-tuning. But you would be surprised what opinions serve online.
Pretty safe to assume that all school shootings for the remainder of the 2020s will manifest from Hollow Knight Silksong.
Okay.
It's not just enough to die in a room where all of a sudden some Indian guy, map maker, wants to help you, but he slows down the frame rate and then the screen's pausing and you can't stay alive. If this is the GTA 6 of indie games, I hope the actual GTA 6 is the GTA 6 of GTA 6s. I feel like I'm on freaking crazy pills here.
I feel like I'm taking crazy pills!
I'm not going to reply to online comments from random people since it would be meaningless, but stuff like claiming the game is hard and therefore bad is a very common opinion. Arguments like this remind me of guys like Quantum TV who claimed that games like Elden Ring shouldn't exist because they are hard.
You guys literally sound like abuse victims, right?
Like, you do know that whether the game is hard or not is already pretty subjective. And even then, the game's difficulty is often a part of the overall experience. What about games like I Wanna Be the Boshi that are designed specifically around being too hard? Is it bad design because you said so? Or what about Pathologic, which also, while being somewhat rewarding, is kinda miserable, which is the point. Hell, the original Hollow Knight had the true ending locked behind a 40-minute boss rush, which preceded God knows what. Such takes are so narrow-minded. A game can be whatever the hell it wants to be. It doesn't mean it's bad as long as the execution is good. It feels like some folks view fairness as a subjective concept but not fun, whereas fun is the most subjective thing ever. Hardcore stuff can be super fun, even when they are pure bullshit, like the original Ninja Gaiden 2 on Master Ninja difficulty. Fairness, on the other hand, can be very easily classified. If you can beat it by playing by the established rules of the game, then it's fair. An example of unfairness would be an enemy being able to bypass those rules and getting an advantage that would otherwise be impossible. For example, Dark Souls enemies being able to hit you through a wall, unblockable setups in fighting games, hitboxes not matching the animation, unreachable moves, literal cheating, gambling, and so on. And Silksong is designed in a very specific way to be difficult. It's targeted towards a particular player base, sure, but it's mostly a fair experience. Personally, the only area that I felt was too hard was Biowater. Surprise, surprise, it's an entirely optional area and it's designed to be hard for specific reasons. All the small changes mostly cover Act 1, not Act 2 or 3, and they do not nerf Biowater in any way, which shows Team Cherry's desire to ease out the difficulty curve and not make the game itself easier. Nerfing Biowater would undoubtedly make the game more fun, but it would also ruin the core principle behind Biowater.
Because we decided early in this game to implement Path of Pain 2.0. I did not struggle with Path of Pain like this.
Hollow Knight's story is similar to that of Dark Souls, in a sense that you have the general outline of what's going on, but the big picture is a puzzle that you need to assemble from bits and pieces of lore that you get from lines of dialogue, items, and enemy descriptions from bestiary. Since a lot of it is up to interpretation, I might get stuff wrong, but I'll do my best to lay out what is going on in a Kingdom of Faerûn. First though, let's separate Silksong's lore and story. The story of Silksong is pretty simple and straightforward. Long ago, a pale higher being called Grandmother Silk arrived in the city of Faerûn and took over it. Using her threads, she evolved the Farleads, small arachnids driven by instinct, into weavers. High above in the cradle, where her threads could reach every corner of the land below, the weavers sustained the mother's light eternally through the production of song, you might say Silksong. At some point, the weavers turned on her. They lured Grandmother Silk to sleep and seized control of Faerûn for themselves, maintaining her slumber through the Citadel's elaborate system of song and prayer, and hiding her existence from the rest of Faerûn. Now dormant, Grandmother Silk was bound in servitude, her threads collected and used by the Citadel in order to gain power. But the weavers realized she'd always be the true ruler. They tried to create traps, tools and bindings to be free of her permanently. These attempts ended in failure, and some weavers decided to leave Farum, while the ones who remained ultimately died. The ones who left set their goals to produce someone who can set Farum free from Grandmother Silk. One of those weavers was Hornet's mother. Grandmother Silk was desperate to wake up and began haunting the threads of Farum, ensnaring bugs and driving them mad. Her aim was to bind all the souls and shells of Farum together into one mind, so they would devote themselves to her eternally. The threads collected by the Citadel before now only sped up its downfall, resulting in Grandmother Silk controlling the bugs through her silk. This is where Hornet comes in. Sometime after the events of the first game, Hornet got captured and taken to Farum. After Hornet breaks free, she begins her journey through the haunted kingdom of Farum to the top of the Citadel to find out the purpose behind her capture. Along the way, she confronts Lace, a creature created entirely out of silk, a daughter of Grandmother Silk and Hornet's aunt. Hornet defeats her twice and enters the cradle, where she defeats Grandmother Silk, who's her actual grandmother, kinda. This is where we can get multiple endings, but there is really only one true ending. And seeing how this game references the original Hollow Knight's ending, it is obvious there is a definitive canon ending, although Team Cherry stated otherwise before, but that was obviously bullshit. So let's check the true ending. In order to get the true ending, Hornet allies with Snail Shamans to trap Grandmother Silk. After defeating her, Hornet uses Nidoland to trigger the trap. The trap binds Grandmother Silk to the Void, opening a portal to the Abyss to allow Void tendrils to pull her in. However, Grandmother Silk grabs onto Hornet, threatening to pull her into the Void with her. Lace intervenes, cutting her mother's arm off and stabbing her with her pin to free Hornet. This leads to her getting dragged into the Void along with Granny Silk, which makes the Void go mad and infect all of Farum. Grandmother Silk doesn't seem to want to let go of her life, trying to at least save Lace and not get her dragged. Hornet now must cooperate with Snail Shamans, again, to descend into the Abyss, defeat Lost Lace and save Farum. To do that, she needs a certain artifact that she can get in the Red Memory, a journey to Hornet's memories. The first memory takes place in the Weaver's Den when Hornet is a child. She is shown practicing silk powers surrounded by multiple weavers who urge her to prove herself more weaver than worm. The second memory takes place in the Beast Den. In it, Herod the Beast speaks to her daughter, telling her to ignore weavers' whispers and seek her own hope beyond others' designs. The third memory takes place in the Hive. Hive Queen Vespa is training Hornet, warning the others will hunt her down. So Hornet was trained by a literal Hornet. Was she named after her master? The final memory takes place in the White Palace. Hornet is standing before the White Lady, who expresses pity that Hornet will see them as harsh for the ways they attempt to achieve their wish. Hornet answers that she understands the wish of the queens that raised her, the wish that she may be strong enough to carve her own fate. The White Lady acknowledges Hornet's growth with the strength that they hoped, and gives her the Everbloom so she can break herself free from her fate. This is a deep inspection of Hornet's character, although it comes at the price of retconning some of the things from the first game. The first retcon is that Herod the Beast, Hornet's mother, is now a weaver, and Hornet is half weaver by extension. That was never stated in the first game. While I don't remember any contradictory statements, I think something like this would have been mentioned. Another thing is the involvement of Vespa in Hornet's life. In the first game, the Hive was pretty much entirely separated from Hollow Nest and its affairs, so it seems weird Vespa would train the Princess of Hollow Nest and go as far as give her her weapon. It seems this was always the plan though, as Team Cherry designed Hornet as a child of 3 queens. So I guess I just find the execution contradictory. The Everbloom's function is also a bit slippery. In the original game, it appeared to interact with the void in a different way, entirely nullifying it as seen in the Godmasters. It did not protect from the void itself. Anyway, once Hornet has the Everbloom, she descends, defeats Lost Lace, and attempts to escape the abyss with Lace by borrowing a bit of power from Grandmother Silk. But the Everbloom doesn't last and Void catches her. This is where the Knight comes in to save the day. He helps Hornet and Lace escape and reach the top. Happy ending. Oh, and if you complete a specific quest which you can find at the edge of our room and which requires you to visit certain places by completing a riddle, you get a setup for the DLC. I think the story of Silksong is an improvement compared to the first game. Hollow Knight's story was relatively simple. You arrive in a town, there is an infection and you need to deal with it. The basic premise of Silksong is not that complex either, but it is elevated by the fact that Hornet is an actual character with her own agency and voice. You can relate to her. The Red Memory is by far my favorite story beat of the game, as it gives Hornet more reasons to save Farroom and confront the last boss. It's a typical Disney-like story of a princess overcoming her fate and carving her own path, sure, but the execution is solid.
Clap of my ass cheeks keeps alerting the guards.
Additionally, the game's story is amplified by what I would describe as epic gaming moment. Small set pieces that break the standard gameplay loop. With that said, some of the narrative decisions aren't great, particularly the endings. Well, it always felt like there was a definitive ending in the first game, even before the release of Silksong. Each ending was constructed in such a way that it was plausible for them to happen. Here, the existence of Act 3 kind of renders endings of Act 2 obsolete. And while I geeked out when the Knight appeared, but it's blatant fan service and a literal Deus Ex Machina. Why didn't he appear earlier? Characters are other living beings that you can interact with while on your journey. They can offer information, lore, goods, and storylines of their own that shift and evolve depending on your actions. There are far too many to go through individually, so I'll highlight the ones worth talking about. The first and the most prominent character in the game is Hornet, returning from the first game and now taking center stage as the protagonist. Hornet is the daughter of the Pale King and Hera the Beast, half-sister to the Knight and a granddaughter of Grandmother Silk, as well as a niece to Lace. Kinda. Unlike the Knight from the first game, who was a silent protagonist, Hornet is her own character, with her own thoughts and dialogue. Hornet is strong, courageous, solemn and proud, as it fits for a princess. It seems the events of the first game left a mark on her, and while she pretends for a moment that she's fixated on her own goals, it's obvious she cares a lot about Farroom and its inhabitants and will not let the kingdom fail. Hornet has an internal conflict. Being born from a weaver and a pale being, she's destined for greatness. The weavers believed her fate was to defeat and consume Grandmother Silk, but her mother desired for Hornet to forge her own path, find a different way, and depending on what you do, she can.
The story, it's like slightly more involved than the original game, but still not much. The main character being able to talk doesn't really add anything, but it doesn't really take anything away either.
The overall enjoyment from the story and your involvement in it is rather subjective. But saying that making the protagonist an actual character doesn't add much is something I disagree with heavily. She's someone you can actually relate to, sympathize with, and care about, which gives the player more reason to, well, play and
finish the story.
Chakra, a warrior cartographer, of a tribe from Farroom's edge. She values strength, courage, discipline and skill. She befriends Hornet, and throughout your journey, she will sometimes come to your aid. She traverses Farroom in search for her lost master, who was like a mother to her. Tragically, she finds the master dead. Hornet can join Chakra's somber song-sending ritual, a beautiful, somber moment. Grindel is a snitch bug that was imprisoned in a cell in the Marrow. Snitch bugs are a group of thieves that scavenge goods from Farroom citizens and ruins. Grindel was eventually locked up for something he calls light thievery. After freeing him, you can trade rosary beads for information on treasure. Though his gossip is often of questionable value, his own values are obvious. He has none, caring only about what he can steal. Even when the world ends, he only cares about stealing. The Flea Caravan has a bunch of NPCs you can interact with. The Flea's quest echoes the Grub's quest from the first game. Fleas are creatures found sleeping or trapped throughout Farroom. When Hornet saves a flea, it lets out a characteristic and then flies off to rejoin the caravan. Mushka is the flea master. He's a stranger to Farroom who wants nothing more than to travel across the kingdom with his caravan, as generations of fleas have done before him. He cares very deeply about his fellow fleas, although he's suspicious of Krat. He dreams of finding a safe place with lots of room where he and his companions can stay permanently, but he's hesitant to journey without such a place located ahead of time. When the end of the world is near, he wishes to host the Festival of the Flea, one grand celebration before everything is consumed by what's coming. Hornet can participate in the festival, taking part in different minigames. The festival is a nice subversion of expectations. In the first game, once you gathered all the grubs, a horrible twist occurred where it was revealed the father of the grubs ate all of them. Let's call it a first subversion. Here, at first you kinda expect something horrible to happen too, only for it to be revealed as a celebration.
The dirge I sing is for the end of our old lives. Here at the end of times, our paradise crumbles beneath us. Flea and friend alike, all will soon be consumed. What other choice do we poor wretches have? Cruel fate leaves us with only one last task. Dear friend, Miss Hornet, forgive us, but we beg one more favor from you. Will you accompany us in our final act?
I saw your plea posted at Delhart, Sir Flea, and accept your request.
The pact is made then. Fellows, steel yourself. It is time. It is time. It is time for the Festival of the Flea. One last grand celebration before the Black Quakes pull us all down into the darkness. Rouse yourself, fleas, one last time. Let the games begin.
Sharma is a naive, cheerful pilgrim on a spiritual journey. He is occasionally seen near benches or certain settlements, accompanying Hornet on her journey to the Citadel during Act 1 and aiding fellow pilgrims at Songclave for the majority of Act 2 and 3. Hornet seems to begin to care for him due to his innocence and lack of combat prowess, although he becomes a bit less naive later in the game, especially in Act 3. Silksong has a big cast of unique characters, each with their own story, from positive, cheerful and kind to mischievous, deceiving, self-centered bugs. Their design also varies a lot, from nice and sweet to cryptic, mysterious and utterly disgusting. Their stories and characteristics are quite simple, but they excel at their simplicity. They are easily recognizable and quickly become fan favorites. The player heavily attaches to them despite how few moments you share with each and every NPC. And the one consistent issue is that so much of this is easily missable. Certain characters are met in certain places if certain conditions are met, and if those conditions aren't met, they move on or disappear, often without any signal that you have missed them. You can be invested in a character arc and then simply never see them again, with no indication of where they went or what triggered their absence. Obviously, apart from looking through a wiki. Silksong tries to avoid such problems from happening. Most NPCs have light conditions to meet, but I'm not sure how prominent the issue actually is, as I tried exploring each area in detail. On a less thorough playthrough, this issue can be more occurring. It's not a problem per se, this is just how Team Cherry wants to lay out the narrative, but I consider it to be an issue if following a specific storyline becomes too confusing and you have to rely on a wiki. And Silksong definitely doesn't shy from hiding stuff. Last but not least, I wanna mention the former ruler of Verdania, the Green Prince. He's first encountered in a locked cage in Sinner's Road. He's tormented by something, but it's not clear by what. Hornet can free him, although he's not really appreciative of that. After Cogwork Dancers are defeated, the Green Prince can be found nearby. It is here the prince explains that Cogwork Dancers were made from the soul of his partner. His partner sacrificed himself in order to protect their kingdom from the Citadel. Unfortunately, it was all in vain, as Verdania still fell. Later, he can be found at the ruins of Verdania, grieving for his lost kingdom. He just wants to be left alone, now that all is lost. I like this quest, but it represents the issue I was talking about before. How are you supposed to find him here apart from just stumbling upon him? In any case, Hornet decides to enter his memories and fucking murder him, call him Vayne and place his heart in her home at display. What did Team Cherry mean by this? It should come to no surprise that Silksong's lore is wrapped in religious subtext and music motifs. It unfolds through dialogues, enemy descriptions, visuals, and needling interactions, often ambiguous, open to interpretation. It varies from 99% true but isn't spelled out to made up bullshit with no guaranteed proof but still plausible. So in the beginning, Farum, much like Hollow Nest, was just a cave, although it was mentioned before that Hollow Nest was the only kingdom. That might have been a lie spread within Hollow Nest itself, or they were just hyping themselves up. Judging from the intro cinematic and the conditions on the surface, the world of Hollow Knight probably looks like a harsh, empty world, where only small, hardy creatures or beings of enormous scale can survive, like worms, I guess. In caverns, with an absolutely bonkers amount of biodiversity, actual civilization flourishes. Pre-Farum, kingdoms like the Hunters, Coral Warriors, and Verdania dotted these caves. Then Grandmother Silk showed up and was like, "Nice cave, it's mine now. Either get with it or get lost." The other kingdoms tried to resist, but let's be real, Grandmother Silk is a higher being. You ain't just beating that. Eventually, Grandmother Silk created a society under her belt. First came her weavers and their weaver homes. Then the kingdom of Farum and the Citadel would follow. Grandmother Silk created the weavers by infusing a spider-like bug with her silk, which seems to be some form of concentrated soul, hence why it can be used to heal wounds, control bugs, or to operate some machinery within the weaver homes. The mother lied to the weavers about their origins, telling them that they were her daughters and that they were divine, which might be one of the reasons they later revolted against her. She does refer to the weavers as her daughters, though at least the first sinner seems to think that she is more uncaring than she makes herself out to be. Whether that is true or the first sinner is just biased is not exactly known. Another reason why they have rebelled might be because they just got tired of working for Grandmother Silk, as she made them produce song. but there is no clear answer as to why. But at some point or another, Grandmother Silk has been lulled to sleep by the weavers against her will so that they could rule the kingdom in her stead and use her silk freely for their own uses. To keep Grandmother Silk asleep, the weavers set up a religious system to entice pilgrims to go to the citadel to produce song, which would keep Grandmother Silk asleep. Grandmother Silk's existence was hidden entirely. Pilgrims who reached the citadel were inducted into the choir. The worthiest among them were told that they had been chosen to ascend to the cradle and worship before the kingdom's divine heart. To be allowed to ascend, pilgrims had to obtain the threefold melody. Although it is heavily implied by Hornet and the caretaker that obtaining the melody was effectively impossible for a normal bug. If it wasn't clear yet, the whole religious system is a scheme. Unfortunately, even with the whole system set up, the weavers came to the same uncomfortable conclusion. Grandmother Silk would always be the true monarch of Farloom. They wanted to break free of the system they themselves had created. In Weavenest Atla and Weavenest Morgwen, they created traps, tools and bindings to be free of her permanently. While they built the snare setter, they never managed to create a large version, and all their other attempts ended in failure. The weavers tried to create a divine child, Eva, a life form spawned from runes. However, she was a failure as well, too frail, unable to move, and only sustained by an iron shell. A portion of the weavers said, you know what, we're off, and left Farloom to find another place to be. It seems like they scattered all over the world, some finding their way to Hollow Nest and found in Deep Nest. They were hunted across the world on the orders from Grandmother Silk. The funny thing is that the first game mentions that the weavers of Deep Nest eventually returned to the original land, which would be Farloom. So they ran from Farloom to Hollow Nest and then, I guess, ran back, after which they probably died. The ones who stayed in Farloom died as well, with the exception of Widow. The citadel kept working though. The upper caste of the citadel consisted of the conductors, the architects and the wall keepers. The conductor's role was to rule the citadel and to guide Farloom to greatness. The architects were tasked with creating the machinery and automatons of Farloom, sustaining its walls, floors and voice. The vault keepers were responsible for delivering sermons and leading prayers, as well as preserving the kingdom's history and secrets. The citadel used the services and labor of many bugs throughout Farloom. The most prominent example of this is the Underworks. The bugs of the Underworks worked incessantly for the citadel. It was promised to them that they would eventually be brought upwards into the citadel and obtain a holy reward, which never came to pass. Bugs could confess their sins to an automated system, which always declared them guilty of a grave sin and told them to work off cycle without stopping to eat. Even after the system collapsed entirely, the workers in the Underworks kept going. A major part of the Citadel's religious system was its focus on sins. Song had to be sung continuously, without faltering, and anything that compromised the bug's ability to contribute was therefore a moral failing. Infirmity, sickness, death itself, all were classified as sins and banished from the Citadel. Sinners were imprisoned in the slab. Notably, even the jailers are prisoners here, as apparently their ancestors committed a grave sin that had long been forgotten, and the descendants of them had to serve in the slab to obtain absolution. The prisoners themselves don't see the slab as a prison. They see it as a holy site, a place of forgiveness. At some point, the architects completed the Cogwork Core, a system capable of producing song eternally. The Citadel no longer needed the choir. The conductors issued their final edict, announcing that they could now sustain the Citadel's voice for eternity. However, in the meantime, the Silk Infusion program backfired catastrophically. as the shells of bugs were infused with silk, so they never had to cease their duties. Grandmother Silk used the silk to take control of the bugs, dead and alive. The experience of being haunted resembles something like a forced hive mind, awareness subsumed into a collective will. I am uncertain if this hive mind plan was Grandmother Silk's idea all along, and that's what the first sinner was against, or if it was something she got as an idea in her sleep. Grandmother Silk also created her own custom-made children, Lace and Phantom.
He's a phantom.
They are artificial silk beings, though Lace appears to be considerably more significant than Phantom, who was eventually discarded. There is a moment worth noting. When Hornet is first brought to Farloom and caged, a silk fly lands on the cage and breaks the seal. The same silk flies later appear under Lace's direction, so maybe Lace helped Hornet escape. This might be for one of two reasons. Either it's a first act of defiance against Grandmother Silk, should capturing Weavers be her plan, or it could be to aid Grandmother Silk plan if the capturing of Weavers is an act independent of Grandmother Silk's will. The same flies later assist Hornet in reaching Phantom through the mist, which complicates both readings. Maybe they act on their own judgment. Grandmother Silk's motivations in general are up to interpretation. Were the bugs that captured Hornet, and by extension other Weavers, controlled by Grandmother Silk, or did they act on behalf of the Citadel? Journal description of the envoy suggests that the bugs that captured Hornet were explicitly haunted by a singular will. Plus, Hornet deduced that the lights had been out in the Citadel for generations. But then, how did the bugs still were haunted beyond the walls of Farloom? Even in Moss Grotto, the haunting seems to have no effect. Still, the first option seems possible, but then we don't really know why Grandmother Silk needs all the Weavers back along with Hornet. It is implied that Grandmother Silk wants to consume Hornet and become even more powerful, but she's already one of the most powerful beings in the Hollow Knight universe, so why would she want to be more powerful? Or maybe Grandmother Silk just got jealous that other Weavers left her, and as for Hornet, she just maybe wants to keep her in a cage to keep company, or serve her, or be a replacement daughter. That is what Lace seems to think. All I can say, Grandmother Silk seems to be weirdly fixated on leaving a legacy. All the attempts at creating children and then helping to save Lace, I don't think she particularly loves Lace, but I do think she's terrified of leaving nothing behind. She'd rather die than let her legacy vanish. But that is my interpretation. The actual in-game actions are vague. Then we have the Weavers. Why did they decide to go against her? Well, we can assume they just didn't like constantly working for her. It seems they didn't have the best conditions. Eva mentions that for Weavers to bear children is extremely painful, almost impossible. Eva herself is an attempt to have a child, but a failed one, at least in the Weaver's opinion. But then we have a bunch of Weavers in Deep Nest. Anyway, it's unclear whether they just can't have children or Grandmother Silk made them that way, but it seems they didn't know the exact truth about their creation. The first sinner might have known, which is why she got locked in, but that's just a theory. And this is something I both enjoy and find lacking. The subtleties of this world's construction and the way we can piece things together. We have all these questions, and finding satisfying answers is not always possible. Why is Scrounge in Belhart when clearly they are related to the Citadel's lore keepers? What causes beings to be pale? Not all questions must be answered, sure, but some are too ambiguous for my taste. And let's be real, most players don't get this information from the game itself, but rather go on the wiki or watch a Mossback video on YouTube. Granted, I feel like Silksong is easier to digest than, say, the original Hollow Knight or something like Elden Ring or even Dark Souls, but I can't really prove it since my POV comes from someone who tried to immerse himself in this world. so I can't really speak for someone who might have had a different experience.
The world of Hollow Knight is very interesting to me. I just don't know a ton about it.
But I can say that I rather enjoyed Silksong's story and lore, despite its shortcomings. I loved the way religious themes are threaded through the motif of song and then expressed outward into the world design, the enemy design, the NPCs, the architecture of the place. While I have some gripes with it, playing Nidon is one of the coolest lore mechanics. You get internal thoughts of characters to get more lore knowledge, and then the gameplay aspect of it is just awesome, with many characters having their own unique songs. And just how many songs are there? We've skimmed through, if such a word can even be used about my reviews. In any case, we've covered a couple of topics that serve the same category, that being the narrative. The topics in questions were the story, lore, and characters. So, what can be said about the game's overall narrative? It's rather simplistic in nature, but that is to be expected. Narrative is definitely Hollow Knight's least significant component, which I don't have a problem with. If you've seen any of my videos before, you know that I value gameplay first and foremost. And a very small fraction of people come to play Hollow Knight and Silksong because of the story. The characters and the world being memorable are mostly due to their designs and overall vibe rather than their complexity and depth. Still, simple does not necessarily mean bad, and even if it's not a center point, it's still a vital part of the game. Let's judge Silksong's narrative in terms of consistency, plot holes, and overall quality. Well, it is consistent. The characters have spelled out motivations and they stay true to themselves. They act naturally and it doesn't feel like their actions are determined by the narrative or gameplay reasons. Hornet is brought to Farroom and it's natural for her to want to find out why. It is also natural for her to begin to care for its inhabitants, since she helps them so much during her stay here, and it's in line with her characterization from the first game, where she obviously cared about Hollow Nest and its inhabitants. Secondary characters are all quite straightforward. They have small stories that don't really cross between one another. Some of the characters go through a journey, a pilgrimage if you must, and change in the process, and the changes that occur are pretty natural. Other characters stay the same throughout the game. Lacey's betrayal also does not come out of nowhere, since she's set up to be at least somewhat not in the right mind, and it's obvious she's not that loyal to Grandmother Silk to begin with, although it is funny to hear Hornet refer to her as a child, and her overall behavior is a bit childish, when in reality she should be pretty old. Moments where some cracks start to appear in the narrative are the places where Silksong comes into contact with the original Hollow Knight. At best, those references come off as fanservice bits. At worst, they outright contradict the first game. Luckily, there aren't many of those moments. And as I mentioned before, the overall vagueness of narrative works both ways, to the game's benefit and to its detriment. One thing I would say is that if Hollow Knight was a game about bugs that act human-like, Silksong is more about people that just happen to look like bugs. The world of the original Hollow Knight is one of the best things about the game. Hollow Nest was a beautiful, atmospheric place with genuine depth. Multiple hubs radiating outward into distinct regions, each with its own color palette, its own logic, its own reasons for existing within the larger geography. You could immerse yourself endlessly into this world of bugs, cities, catacombs, and strange places. This has always been Team Cherry's greatest strength, the ability to construct a world of enormous scale where every area is visibly distinct and yet the whole thing feels like one continuous living place. Each region had a visual identity and a lore reason for its location. Distinct enemy sets and mechanical ideas reinforced that sense of place further. Hollow Knight is a masterclass in world design, and it sets a high bar. Silksong takes place in a different city, Farloom, a vast network of caves and tunnels with a crushing number of 24 areas. From lime green Moss Grotto to gloomy Greymoor, where the rain never stops, to the underworks filled with machinery, and of course the Citadel, lavish and richly decorated. Kingdoms, cities, lakes, prisons, forests, swamps. Farloom has it all. The introductive area is Mosslands, that consists of Moss Grotto and Bone Bottom. It's a serene place covered in green mosses, bringing peace and tranquility before a long hike. And to those who could not make it, there is a cemetery to the west, a place to bury the dead inhabitants. From Bone Bottom, the path leads into the marrow, composed entirely of bone and the ancient shells of long-dead bugs, forming the fragile foundation on which the rest of the kingdom is built. The upper eastern area featured red flowers warning us of dangers of the Hunter's March, while the bottom is filled with lava, spilling out from the deep docks. The deep docks is an industrialized forge area. True to its name, the area features platforms and docks suspended over lakes of lava and beds of burning flintstone, and forge workers equipped with bell-shaped helmets, protecting them from falling rubble. Next up is Farfields, an area with grassy caverns, treacherous lava pools, scorched fields, and wind updrafts. Hornet can ride the updraft with Drifter's Cloak up all the way to Greymoor. Greymoor is a gloomy place trapped in muted tones, inhabited by crows and mites with constant rainfall. The entire place has a southern feel to it. To the east lies the Crow Lake, and to the west there is a chapel and a tavern. A town of Bellheart, built from the numerous bells, the last settlement pilgrims can rest at before their final ascent to the Citadel, a place Hornet sees in two states. At first, the town is haunted, its residents strung in silk threads hanging from the ceiling, and all the buildings closed. After Widow is defeated, Bellheart gets freed from the haunted thread. The shops open up and the town starts living again, although past its finest shine, with the music, religion and song being the leitmotif of the entire game. It's only fitting for the town to be built from bells of different sizes. And the primary color of the area is goldish copper, giving it a warm, comfy feeling, fitting for a safe zone. Even Hornet can get a bell home here. Shellwood is a lush subterranean forest, another greenish area, but this one's more of an ancient woodland inhabited by dangerous flora and fauna, where shafts of light pierce through the thick canopy of dark green trees. Blasted Steppes is a stormy desert area at the edge of Farloom. It's the final path to the entrance of the Citadel, and the atmosphere here is fitting. Strong winds and sand from the wasteland continually batter the Blasted Steppes, eroding much of the old construction. The main landmark of Blasted Steppes is a huge pit in the center, which vertically spans almost the entirety of the area's height. At the bottom is a bridge destroyed by Hornet in the game's opening cutscene, where the pit extends down into Bone Bottom. This fall from Blasted Steppes down to the very beginning is awesome. It connects the whole map and you sort of traverse around it during Act 1. Sinner's Road, Biowater and Petrified Docks are rundown, boggish areas with polluted waters and dangerous creatures. These areas have been polluted by the wastes of the Citadel, turning them into swamps. Now, only the pale lake at the edge of the docks stayed clean. Sands of Karak, once a flourish kingdom, now a desert comprised of coral and sandstorms. You can say it's a Crimson Desert. The Slab is a local prison bordered by a cold and snowy Mount Frey, a place utterly forgotten where even the jailers are considered prisoners. And then, at the top of everything, the Citadel itself, the Holy City, the endpoint of every pilgrim's journey. In contrast with the rest of the kingdom, the city's structures are opulent and intricately sculpted, and its rooms are lavish and richly decorated. The bulk of the citadel is made of metal and stone, which is covered in gold. It is supposed to be shining, holy and eternal. Most of its inhabitants are now dead, with many areas covered in webs and some entrances barred with furniture. You can find some abandoned facilities here. Restaurants, a theater, a spa, and a memoriam functioning as a garden, where Farroom's ecosystem is preserved. While I omitted some places, the areas of Farroom are diverse, challenging, beautifully crafted set pieces that have a reason beyond gameplay. I really appreciate how far Team Cherry went to give Farroom a feeling of a real, alive place. Well, alive might not be the right word since most of the kingdom is in a dire state, but you get what I mean. Even with the stuff like platforms, which are obviously there for gameplay reasons, they still added those backgrounds that add to the immersion. And while you could say that Hollow Knight had more unique areas, I think Team Cherry were going for something a tad bit different this time. I believe they prioritized immersion first and foremost, not to say that it comes at the price of diversity. Let's look at an example. The map has 5 areas that are shades of green, and some of the areas are also greenish, even if the map color is different, like the Hunter's March and parts of the Petrified Docks, and it makes coherent world building sense. The lower regions of the kingdom are warm, geologically active, and biologically rich. Volcanic activity fertilizes the soil, producing the lush greenery of the mosslands and far fields. The higher you climb, the further you get from that heat, and the vegetation thins out, dries up. But doesn't it come at the price of some areas feeling a bit samey? I think not. Each area still presents itself as a unique place through backgrounds, color schemes, and especially gameplay mechanics, like the far fields with its wind columns or Petrified Docks with Half-Life-like enemies, or Verdania with unique puzzles and enemies that teleport. Each area also nicely flows into one another. There is a bit of fire and heat in the Marrow, but then the deep docks have full-on rivers of lava, and then far fields have wind columns rising from the spots where the heat escapes. I strongly believe this is Team Cherry's biggest strength, their world design. Not just that the worlds are large or detailed or atmospheric, but that they think through the reasons things are where they are, down to the soil composition, and then trust that internal consistency to do its quiet work on the player. With all that positivity, are there any negatives? Due to the Coral Gorge and the Hunter's Nest being cut, it feels like ants and the coral regions are very underutilized, especially the coral region, which had a unique presentation, unlike anything else in the kingdom. Team Cherry stated that the area was removed because having beautiful lush areas went against their narrative that they were trying to tell about a place where the citadel has really consumed the lands beneath it, noting that it reduces the drive of the story and the character if the world is beautiful and fine. I can see their point, and the narrative is definitely beaten into you with each and every area being destroyed and devastated by the citadel, but they could have achieved the same result by having a coral area be in a memory, just like Verdania. This way it might have worked even better, as you would be able to see how beautiful and lush the area was before the Citadel's influence. Maybe we will get something similar in terms of visuals in the DLC. Now that we've covered the Kingdom of Faerûn, let's talk about how we actually move through it. The game is composed of 3 acts: Faerûn, Citadel of Song, and the Abyss. Each act has its own set of story objectives, and Hornet must complete to progress to the next act. Ignoring the player's route, Hollownest was a web with paths spreading in different directions, with City of Tears at the center of the kingdom. In Faerûn, on the other hand, everything points to the top, to the Citadel, highlighting its symbolic meaning as a religious institution that governs Faerûn and the destination to the pilgrims of the kingdom. Before we go to all those distant places, we need to climb out of Mos Grotto. Here we get our first task, to reach the Citadel at the very top of the kingdom. Hornet must ascend through this once thriving kingdom, meeting obstacles, merchants, wanderers and pilgrims on her way. A lot of players claim Act 1 is more linear, but I think upon a closer inspection you'll find this statement faulty. Although most first-time players will probably go through the same route, from Mosslands to the Marrow, to Deep Docks, to Farfields, to Greymoor, Belhard, then Shellwood, Blasted Steps, finally reaching the Grand Gate. In a typical Metroidvania manner, once you get an upgrade, places previously unreachable get unlocked, which often means you need to backtrack to explore new routes and areas. For example, while progressing through the Marrow, you'll probably stumble upon the Bellway station, with the path blocked by the Bell Beast, who's trapped in Silk. If you didn't get the Silk Spear skill by then, you won't be able to progress forward. Once you acquire the skill, you can return, free the beast, and unlock the path. In the first version, Silksong does not require a lot of backtracking. Most of the upgrades you get allow you to progress through the area you're already in. As in the case with the Bell Beast, the Silk Spear upgrade is right next to it, and you might even get it before getting to the Beast. The next upgrade we get is in Deep Docks, the Swift Step, which allows you to get to this place in the same area. The Drifter's Cloak we get in the Farfields allows us to progress through the Farfields. So the game seems linear, but in reality it gives you a bunch of options. The diversions you could make are: you can get to the Greymoor with a Fleet Caravan, not through the Farfield, which in turn makes the Morwing fight entirely optional. Wormways, where you can access this door, providing an alternative route to Shellwood, skipping Greymoor and Belhard. The problem is the aforementioned door is locked behind a simple key which costs 500 rosaries, so most players won't be getting it straight away. On top of that, Wormways is one of the harder areas of the game, but this option does exist. Or you can use that key on the door in the Deep Docks, which will give you access to the Farfield, skipping the Lace fight. The Hunter's March is largely optional in Act 1, but yields a new crest and meaningful upgrades for those who seek it out. The underlying philosophy is consistent across all of these. If a fight or a section is proving too difficult, the game quietly offers an alternative. And to find these ways, you need to explore. And it's not to say the areas themselves are straightforward. Each zone is a maze-like construction with hidden paths, unlockable short paths, and intersections with nearby areas. For example, here's the Shellwood progression. First you rest at a bench, then you buy the map from Chakra, then you get the Long Pin, get the Mask Shard and the Lost Flea, then you fight Sister Splinter, get the Cling Grip and go to the bench and Bellway station. The Cling Grip is the upgrade that opens a lot of different passages. It allows you to explore a bunch of areas inaccessible before. On top of that, the Cling Grip allows you to return to Belhard to defeat the Widow and free the townfolk, which in turn gives you another skill, needling, which opens another bunch of passages. You also now have two main routes to the Citadel. The first and more obvious route runs through blasted steps to the Grand Gate, which requires activating bells in various areas. If you are missing any benches, you'll have to go back to activate them. Some might even find this idea questionable.
This is a slightly strange quest. After triumphantly climbing all the way to the top of the blasted steps, you may find you are stopped at the very last moment and have to go all the way back down again. It's like getting to the top of a mountain and realizing you left your camera at base camp.
Disregarding the fact that there is a high chance you've already rung all the bells before getting here, since they are not exactly hidden, I think the idea behind this check serves two purposes. First is to ensure you've gone through all the areas and defeated the Widow. And second, it works thematically with the game's heavy stress on the music, bells and song, and as a part of a pilgrimage that these poor bugs must take. But I do agree that if you get to the gate before ringing all the bells, it feels redundant to go back and ring some of them. Beyond the gate, you're met with the last judge, the final arbiter, ensuring only those without sin are allowed entry into the Citadel. There is a second, secret path you can take through the Sinner's Road. Through that you get to the Mist. The Mist is one of the game's most distinctive areas. It's an area covered in a confusing fog with no linear path and where every passageway will lead you to a randomized area within the Mist. If you keep going the wrong way, you will find yourself looping around the area for a long time. To progress through the Mist, you must utilize the Guide of the Butterflies, using the needling ability to reach Exhaust Organ and fight the area's boss, Phantom. Both the Last Judge and Phantom are the final challenges of Act 1, although they challenge the player in a tad bit different aspects of the game. The approach to the Last Judge is grand and epic, with judges guarding the way to the entrance, and the Last Judge proposing a toughest challenge up till now. He hits hard and takes a lot to go down. The route through the Sinner's Road feels different, as it's a literal swamp with cockroaches and a secret entrance that leads to another secret entrance, where the Last Judge challenges the player's skill in boss fights. The Phantom route requires more from the player in the exploration and puzzle side of the game, although the Phantom fight is a challenge in its own right. Now we move to Act 2, the Citadel of Song, which consists of 3 areas: the Citadel itself, the Underworks, and the Cradle. In Act 1, we move through different areas with maybe 1-2 small sub-areas. The Citadel is one huge area with a lot of sub-areas inside. These sub-areas, these rooms, share the same-ish design with the Citadel as a whole, but the rooms themselves have different gimmicks. The Whispering Walls has the shoving boxes, the High Halls has platforming centered around the harpoon, and the Cogwork core is centered around, well, cogs. No matter the route you took in Act 1, the starting area of Act 2 will be the Underworks. After progressing through the Underworks, Hornet enters Coral Chambers, at the top of which she needs to defeat the Cogwork Dancers. After the triumphant victory, we get a new quest: learn the Threefold Melody and open the path to the Citadel's crest. Each of the 3 melody fragments is locked behind a different challenge, each targeting a different skill set. Boatkeeper's Melody is a tough boss fight with Trobio. Conductor's Melody requires you to go through the toughest gauntlet in the game, and to get the Architect's Melody, you must go through the Cogwork core, which is the hardest platforming section so far. You can complete these tasks in any order. 2 of them, Architects and Conductors, require you to have the claw line to complete them, which would probably mean you would get the Boatkeeper's Melody first, then go for the Conductor's Melody and the Architects. But there are many different ways you can approach it. In fact, The claw line is located in the underworks, so you can actually get it before you even fight the cogwort dancers. So you can go through High Hall's gauntlet even earlier, although you won't be able to get the melody yet, so you have to come back later. I really enjoyed this distinct approach to two different acts. While both aren't linear, the first act is focused around ascending to the citadel, while the second act gives you a lot of leeway on how you get to these markers. In any case, after getting all three parts, we move to the endgame. The elevator opens and the cradle awaits. You face Lace for the first time, or not, depending on your path, then Grandmother Silk, and then it ends. Or does it? If you complete the Silk and Soul wish, you can get access to Act 3. We'll discuss the wish itself a bit later. For now, you get a pretty ambiguous task: discover the fate of Farum. Farum has been infected with the Void. Some locations changed drastically, some did not. New enemies appear and old ones can get infected with the Abyss, making them stronger. NPCs got new dialogue and new quests. Once we get to the Bell Beast, we are met with Bell Eater, a boss which we need to defeat to get the Bell Beast back, and with him a pleasant surprise: his kids, which now allow us to fast travel from almost any place. I'm of two minds about this. Fast travel from any location is a genuinely useful quality of life feature, and the fact that it's granted only in the latter portion of the game seems like the right call. It removes unnecessary traversal in some cases. But I don't like that it's introduced so early in Act 3. I would have loved if you had to descend all the way down, seeing all the changes, all the destruction the Abyss brought, and allowing us to fight new enemies. It would also mirror the goal of Act 1 nicely. Anyhow, Hornet must journey into the Abyss to confront Grandmother Silk and Lost Lace. Hornet finds out she's not yet built for this, escapes the Abyss with our new ability in a thrilling sequence, goes to the Snail Shamans again so they could get her another quest where she needs to fight 3 bosses in 3 locations previously hidden and inaccessible. You can also replace one of the boss fights through a Green Prince questline. After getting the required hearts, going through Hornet's memories and acquiring the artifact that will help us go deeper into the Abyss, we can descend again and finally beat the last boss of the game, Lost Lace. What is astounding is the amount of side and generally missable content Silksong has. Entire zones are hidden behind secret breakable walls. The Memoriam, a fully optional zone inside the Citadel, requires the double jump to reach, and the double jump is itself optional, tucked away at the top of Mount Frey, which is an optional area accessible only with the claw line, which is mandatory but for entirely unrelated reasons. Act 3 itself unlocked through a side quest you might completely miss, and to trigger that quest at all, you need to have satisfied a set of conditions that aren't spelled out anywhere. And then the wish itself tells you to collect 3 souls with no markers, and an item that is found in a hidden room in an optional location. And many wishes are designed that way, where you need to pay attention to the dialogues and the surroundings and different random stuff. But this is not some random wishes. This is an entire act of the game with new locations, enemies and bosses. I think they went a bit too far by making Act 3 so secret. There are too few indicators. This is something the game got criticized for as well.
This is a similar-ish structure to unlocking the true ending of the original Hollow Knight, but the big difference is that the requirements for doing so there were directly tied into your character's journey of discovery, and the path you had to take was a little more intuitive as a result. Here, I was essentially left floundering for a little bit as I tried to figure out which checkboxes still needed to be arbitrarily ticked off.
IGN mentions how getting the true ending in the original Hollow Knight was tied directly to the knight's journey, but I would argue getting to Act 3 is tied directly to Hornet's character arc as well. I can't say if it's less intuitive, although I do agree it's not intuitive enough. And although the checklist that you need to tick off is mostly flexible, there are indeed mandatory quests. Hell, how to get Act 3 is like the most researched topic of the game, which says a lot about how well the requirements are spelled out. And I guess this is where we can talk about the breakable walls, but there isn't really much to talk about. I hate them. I don't like how there are almost no indicators where the breakable wall is actually placed. So if you check the gameplay sections of people familiar with the genre or even people that are not familiar, you'll see them just going from wall to wall, hitting them to find a hidden breakable wall. This is just a stupid mechanic from, probably not from Dark Souls, from something way before, but Dark Souls also has this mechanic and I fucking hate it. I hate it there, I hate it here. If you are going to place hidden walls, make distinct visual indicators. I think some of the walls have those, but definitely not all of them. And I even had cases where there was a hidden path or a breakable wall and I felt like it was there, but I didn't reach it the first time, so I thought it wasn't there, but it actually was there. And it's just, I don't like this idea. Silksong gives a lot of freedom in terms of how you tackle each part of the game, how you progress it, which in turn makes each playthrough unique. If you feel stuck, you can try exploring, finding new ways, new fights, especially in Act 2. The game doesn't just give you markers on the map and tells you where to go. With all this variety and freedom, it's important to navigate the players so they won't get constantly lost. In most cases, Silksong guides the player in such ways that do not break immersion, relying on the world layout, NPCs and clever design choices. Like the boss in the Hunter's March is very difficult if you get too early to them, because you're not supposed to go there until you get certain upgrades. As for the basic tutorial, from the get-go you are taught how to bind. Next, you are taught there are walls that you can break. Then you get the first platform, which teaches you to jump. You fight your first ground enemy and then a flying one to learn about the game's combat. An entrance for the Weavenest Atla teaches you that not all paths can be accessed from the get-go. Apart from that, you rarely can get a pop-up that tells you what a certain button does, and you get some guidance when you open your inventory and check certain equipment. Silksong is far between in terms of guiding the player. Safe to say, Team Cherry expects you have played Hollow Knight before, or similar games at least. The game is rather lackluster in terms of teaching the player how to play it, especially for new players. You aren't really taught how to be better at pogo, skills and tools usage, or healing. The most general and uninspiring way to guide the player is through map markers. I'm not saying it's bad game design, but I really appreciate when the game tries to have as little markers as possible. There are other means of guidance, but this stuff is present in almost every game, and for a reason. Stuff like the Witcher question marks is perhaps the most obvious and the most infamous example of such direction amped up to 11. I'm not really a fan of such design, as it loses all sense of discovery and turns the game into a bucket list. Silksong also has map markers, but strictly in the main objectives. Usually they are just markers in places of yet to be discovered map, so I feel like they are mostly unnecessary and exist just for the player not to forget the overall direction. The only exception are the melodies markers in Act 2 and the hearts in Act 3. With the melodies, because the Citadel is mostly a one big location, it's easy to get lost, especially when the player can reach some of the melody locations before getting the quest. And with the hearts, since it's Act 3, it can be really tedious to discover them, even with the markers. Finding the pollen heart can be hard. Then we have the map itself. When you get to a new area, you don't have the map at first. You need to locate Chakra first. Usually Chakra is somewhere at the beginning of the area, and you can find her by following her rings that she leaves behind and by her singing. chakra does not reach the citadel, so the map source there is different. There, you get the maps of the rooms from these little machines. They don't have any indicators that would lead to them. This is compensated by the locations of the map, which are placed right at the entrance to the level, for the most part. There still can be occasions where you have to progress without a map, which can result in a unique experience. In the White World, you get the map pretty late. The overall design of that level is rather horror-inspired, so progressing without a map adds to the tension. The other case that happened to me was Biowater. The map there can be accessed only when you have the double jump, but the area itself is accessible a lot sooner, and I went in Biowater blind, trying to explore the area and find the damn map. Biowater is one of the toughest and more frustrating areas of the game, with enemies jumping from bushes, so I had to progress through it very slowly. After which I accessed the Mist, which is an area that doesn't have a map at all. All of this resulted in an extremely cautious, long, mapless journey. But once you get the map, you can see the areas you already visited, as well as the areas Chakra drew. Apart from obvious navigation assistance, you can also see locked or unvisited pathways. The usage of the map is obvious, and I don't think we should stay here too long. The one thing is that some hidden walls can also be seen on the map as paths you yet to explore, but not all of the hidden areas, so you have hidden walls on top of hidden walls, and as far as I could tell, the game never really tells you that, so you might think all passageways are visible on the map, at least in some shape or form, but they are not. Then we have in-game markers. Throughout the game, you see these emblems, pins pointing to near places of interest, benches, shops, fast travel. And we also have NPCs who tell us where to go and what to do. Some NPCs give you quests indicating where and how you can complete it. Sometimes they are pretty vague, so you must rely on your knowledge of Faerûn. Silkflies is a source of thematic and literal guidance in the world of Faerûn. Silkflies are used as a source of light or guidance by the pilgrims who journey to the citadel. You encounter them at the very beginning. A silkfly helps Hornet escape the cage. Once Hornet makes her way up through Moss Grotto, silkflies guide her upwards to Bone Bottom, and they play a pivotal role in the Mist, as we already talked about before. The Mist is handled masterfully in terms of guiding the player. Once you enter the area, you get a clue. Flies move towards the exit. A very subtle way to tell you what to do. I wish there were more unique areas like that. Overall, it's safe to say guidance in Silksong is similar to its heavy inspiration, Dark Souls. You're given freedom without many yellow paint leading you. The exploration aspect is a big part of Hollow Knight's appeal. The world design makes traversal through Faerûn both intuitive and maze-like. You always kinda know where to go, but still feel lost in this network of caves and tunnels filled with nasty bugs. And for the most part, the game does a fine job guiding you in the right direction without holding your hand, as long as you pay attention. But sometimes this approach goes too far, for example with Silk and Soul Wish and Act 3 access. It's too hidden, and the list of requirements are never spelled out. And there we have it, Hollow Knight Silksong, the game that for a long time seemed non-existent. An ambitious, sprawling, extraordinary indie game made by a small team from Australia. Despite my many praises, Silksong is not a perfect game. The wishes system has no business being as uninspiring as it is. The difficulty curve front-loads its hardest asks. The economy is dubious. Act 3 is hidden so thoroughly that the majority of players will finish the game without knowing it exists, which is either the most audacious design decision in the genre or a miscalculation, depending on your generosity. Some enemies and skill wouldn't miss a balancing patch too. It's a game with 48 boss fights, the best of which, like Carmelita, the Cogwork Dancers, the Last Judge, belong in any serious conversation about the greatest boss encounters in the medium. It's a game with 24 distinct areas, each grounded in a coherent geological and lore logic that makes Farroom feel like a place that exists. It's a game that trusts you. It trusts you to find the path, to engage with it, to seek out. It trusts you to sit with it and experience it. Silksong is a great game, and they made it for $20.